mute. Okay. And whenever you have to raise a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and that would be the best way. If you leave your mic open, then I may have to forcefully mute you. Then I would be only able to unmute you. Okay, so just be kind enough to leave your mic on mute. Okay. Yep, so welcome to another session of Endpoint Platform Architecture Application Network Refresh course. Quick check. How many of you have participated in the 3-day training program, Application Network Training Program? Please give me a green check mark. Just want to know anybody else. It's only 2 people. Okay. All right. Okay. Yep. So please keep your mic on mute. Please keep your mic on mute. Okay. Yes. So we'll try to keep the session as interactive. We have very few students. That's good. We can have an interactive session. Right. So let's start. Let me introduce myself. My name is Shivdas K. Ramdas. I'm a senior integration architect. You can find me here. LinkedIn.com/in/. Okay. I deliver architecture trainings for MuleSoft. Please leave your mics on mute. A lot of background noise. All right. So let's start. Let me give you a brief introduction. So this today, this is going to be somewhere around 6 hours session, and what we are trying to do is we are going to focus purely on the certification aspect. Okay. At the same time, you can also use this opportunity to clarify any query you have with respect to Endpoint Platform and certification in particular. Okay.
Basically, that's what we're thinking about.
All right. So let's get started. Okay. Reviewing topics covered during this course. Right. So we'll go by module basis here. At the same time, I will cross-refer to the data sheet as we progress. And so the certification is based on the course itself. So you can find the course here, Endpoint training.MuleSoft.com. Certifications, MCPA, okay. So this is the training that was being delivered with respect to this. Just give me a minute. Okay, just need to change the settings so that when people join, they automatically get muted. They can unmute yourself. Okay. All right. Right. So this certification is based on this course. MCPA certification is based on application network course, and it comprises of around 10 modules. Okay. So some of these modules. Where's the course? This is the course. Yep. The certification. This is the course. So let me just briefly walk you through the modules. Okay, so that you get an idea of how we are aligning this course. So this is the link to the course. Okay. So basic introduction to Endpoint Platform. Then we get an understanding of the proven delivery model. Previously it was known outcome-based delivery model. Now it is known as Catalyst. Then how MuleSoft is actually trying to bridge the gap, delivery gap that we have at the moment in the core IT, especially with respect to integration. A brief understanding about application network itself, API-led connectivity, then high-level components of the Endpoint platform, how all these things are interacting with each other, different components and how they are connected with each other. Significance of setting up a C4 to successfully drive an Endpoint platform journey for a customer. Okay. Understanding different deployment options, strengths and weaknesses of each and every different deployment options, and what are the level of effort that can come when something is hosted in MuleSoft versus something when it goes on-prem. How to align Endpoint platform with an organization structure. Then the next one is clearly understanding the difference between identity management and client management. Module 4, which was more focused on designing the application network itself using API-led connectivity, keeping a lot of principles in mind, aligning with the business. API needs to align with business service, and at the same time, how to make it like as much as reusable as possible. How will you design a solution, application network, API-led connectivity, keeping reusability in mind? Then how we enforce our non-functional requirements using API policies. Okay. The capabilities of the API manager, how policies work internally, and what are the different ways to enforce policies, especially like when you're going for embedded enforcements with proxies and with service mesh. Then effectively managing the API's lifecycle, you need to be very strict on the versioning part. Okay, semantic versioning. Okay. Then designing in a domain-driven design model that is using canonical data models, enterprise data models, and what to do when you don't have a data model at all in the first place. Okay. Then something about how to introduce asynchronous design patterns into our application network. For instance, using callbacks and pollings. How to use auto discovery, what are the different types of connectors, and how to approach connecting to a backend system. When a connector is available, when a connector is not available, what is the strategy that you take? Some fundamental problems with APIs itself, like a CQRS problem that could come at some point of time when the APIs are like really monolith. Difference between fine-grained, coarse-grained architecture design patterns. Okay. A brief introduction to event sourcing, how it can fit nicely into your API-led connectivity space, that is using queues and message brokers, and the upcoming features like asynchronous APIs, how you can include all those things in your application network effectively. How you go for automation in the Endpoint platform, and what are the capabilities available in the Endpoint platform to allow you get that level of automation, and the monitoring capabilities that are available in the Endpoint platform. So in a nutshell, like these are the topics that are being covered in the application network course, and the certification is more or less like revolved around these topics. Okay, so we will go for this from a data sheet. Okay, from a data sheet perspective, you can download the data sheet from somewhere down here. Where was it? Certification data sheet should be here somewhere. Data sheet you get here, and MCPA, this is the one you should be focused on. I shared the link in the chat. Please download and keep a copy of the same. Okay, that's the one. Okay, and we're going to cover all these topics one by one. Okay, so explaining application network basics, and from there we start. Okay, so what is Endpoint Platform anyway? Endpoint Platform is an iPaaS. It's a highly capable integration platform. It's an iPaaS as service, but there is a strategy to use the Endpoint Platform as well. Okay, so we try to align this with enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture has two perspectives. One is a strategic perspective, and enterprise architecture has a tactical perspective. The tactical, you can compare this with any form of integrations, like point to point to point to point, anything, right? So it's just connecting two things together. Because over a period of time, a lot of organizations will end up with a lot of systems, with a lot of different data available in different systems. So some way or the other, you have to connect all these things together. So enterprise architecture perspective, a tactical solution is always like, most of the time it boils down to point-to-point integration. Now, whereas like the enterprise architecture also has a strategic approach where you're deciding on like what are the systems that are going to come in to the organization, how they will be connected in a short-term perspective as well as a long-term perspective, and how does it align with the organization's need for change. For instance, like a digital transformation, a good example. Okay. Now, with Endpoint Platform, our strategic approach is going with API-led connectivity. It's a very simple architecture approach. In API-led connectivity, I ignore my typos. Okay. In API-led connectivity, we are prioritizing APIs on top of any other architecture style. Okay, so like you take an API first approach. And with this kind of approach, if you're taking, like whenever you're going to take any architecture approaches like this, parallelly, you need to have some form of practice to put in place to make this work. Okay, and that proven methodology is OBD, outcome-based delivery model, now formerly known as Catalyst approach. Okay, the reason being, most of the time, tactical approaches, strategic approaches, these all fail is because integrations lack alignment with the business. And with an outcome-based delivery model or Catalyst approach, and with API-led connectivity, an organization can successfully roll out integrations and transformations, digital transformations. Okay. Now, Catalyst approach, it is a practice, so you need people behind the scene to make this happen, and that team is a cross-functional team, C4E, okay, or Center for Enablement, a cross-functional team. Okay. Now, to drive this approach, you have Endpoint Platform, and the tactical part of it, that is the technology part of it, you can deliver it using Endpoint Platform. Endpoint Platform is a complete API lifecycle management solution that allows you to quickly build APIs, deploy APIs, and build API-led connectivity. And eventually, the outcome of API-led connectivity is your application network. Okay. So API-led connectivity leads to a composable application network, which is not rigid, it's highly decoupled. At the same time, it's flexible for an organization. Okay, so keeping this in mind as the foundations, let's start on looking at each topics. Okay, so first part of this is like explains MuleSoft proposal for closing the IT delivery gap today. Okay, so at the moment, at the present state, in many enterprises, there are like sufficient need for integration, more than before, because a lot of SaaS applications are coming up, new technologies needs to be adapted. But the existing capacity, the present model cannot be fulfilled. Projects gets like longer than time, like get extended, etc., etc. So how we can put a new practice here in place that can actually close this delivery gap, and that is done by a proposal that is using a production reconsumption model, a production and consumption model. We'll get into it. Now, before going to those area, let's have a brief look at some of the context in which the certification looks for, right? So what do you understand by an API? What do you mean by a modern API? What do you mean by API-led connectivity? What do you mean by application networks? What are the benefits of having API-led connectivity? Differentiate between all these terminologies like API implementation, specification, invocation, business service, etc. Okay. And best ways to define API specifications. Okay. So what is an API? So this is one area like where most of the time students struggle. So let's say like you are an API consumer. API consumer. An API consumer builds an API client. This API client invokes an API implementation. Okay, this is API invocation, which has clearly defined API specification. That API specification could be like RAML or like OAS, something like that, which has got clearly defined API interfaces. That could be like something like RESTful or like SOAP, okay, JSON thing, okay, which provides an API service, which is literally a business service end of the day. For instance, let this be a member enrollment or a mortgage or lending. Okay, so this is the journey. So API consumer makes an API client, which calls an API implementation, which is called an API invocation. An API implementation will have a clearly defined specification and clearly defined technology interface, which in line, when this is invoked, is pure code that works out, but it generates an API service. That is a principle for service-oriented architecture. And this in turn exposes a business service or business capability of an organization or business functionality of an organization. Okay, I'll share all these diagrams post the training session. Okay, but this is one. So clearly understand the differences between all of these things. So describe the capabilities correctly. Use the term API, API implementation, API client, API consumer, and API invocation. Okay. Now, what is API-led connectivity, right? What is API-led connectivity? API-led connectivity is a style of architecture where you prefer to go with API-first approach. Suppose like you are in an organization where you are having a multitude of systems in place. Let's say there is some DB, there are some SaaS applications, there are some, let's say, ERP. Now, and you're also having like incoming data is incoming from external space also. So maybe like you're having EDI files. You are getting events, for instance, like there are organizations which runs purely on event-driven architectures. Events coming from the outside world, and also like people are making REST calls, right? So that is also that. Okay. So you have like two types of system in place. You have data that is incoming from the outside world. They can send you the data in the way they want to. And you also have a backend system, some modern, some legacy, but at some point of time, they're all different. They're not having any form of common data structure. So within which this time frame, you have your business process running, right? Business and process running. So how would you make sure that this are all nicely fit together? You put together two layers, abstracting data or data structures or incoming data. For instance, this is going to be your experience layer. It's going to be your system layer. The system layer's responsibility, you build system APIs to talk to your backend systems. And the goal is to expose the data in a uniform manner into your business layer so that you can orchestrate your business, do your business seamlessly. Okay. So this is going to be SAPI, system APIs. SAPI. The experience layer, you can bring in the data the way you want to. Suppose like your customers are sending like EDI files, or like your partners are sending EDI files, you bring in using an experience layer. That may be like totally different format, but internally like we have set up a standard now at the process layer, and we have a data model also in place. So this all becomes seamlessly easy to integrate. Puppy. So maybe like you may be having numerous business processes, but this becomes reusable automatically. Okay. API, experience API.
ఇది వింటోందండి.
Now, when you go with an API-led connectivity approach, automatically these systems all becomes reusable. That's the fundamental things, right? When you're doing point-to-point integrations, you don't have reusability. But when you do API-led connectivity way, now this is more or less not an API. I would say this would be an app, experience app. This is subscribing to an event, so this is an asynchronous API, but still we can also note it as an app. This may be like a RESTful API, which would be able to make downstream calls. Okay. Now, this forms the fundamentals of building an API-led connectivity. You have two systems. In between, you have a layer of your business, which is orchestrated using APIs, which needs data, both from outside and from inside, and you abstract it with different layers. Okay. Your API forms as your building blocks, recomposable building blocks for your organization. Okay. Now coming back, so right. So this answers what is an API, what is roles and characteristics of modern API. So a modern API, when you say it needs to have a standard protocol. So if you're doing a REST way, it is HTTP. If you're going SOAP way, the SOAP is the protocol, but under the hood, it is using anyway HTTP. So you're using like some form of standard protocol. So in Endpoint Platform, our preferred mode is going with HTTP itself. Then build API-led connectivity that is clearly breaking it down into 3 layers of architecture with system layer, process layer, and experience layer. The system layer, core responsibility of the system layer is to abstract the backend systems. The core responsibility of the experience API is to act as a barrier, or would say like an anti-corruption layer for the data that is coming from the outside world. And at the process layer, we somehow try to chisel it all together to align with the business. Okay. Now, application network is an automatic outcome of API-led connectivity. You don't design an application network, it evolves out of API-led connectivity automatically. Okay. It has some good characteristics. For instance, when you have architectural coherence, you know how systems are put in place and how they are interacting with each other. Tomorrow, like you want to, let's say, move one system to a new one, you want to replace this DB with another DB, for instance. All you need to do is build the same interface, because this is already having a specification and everything. It's just a matter of rewiring things. So this is the plug and play capability that you get, as well as swap out capability you get from application network. You can do a seamless migration, and then you can also have real-time synchronization and phasing out of legacy systems as well. Okay. Very simple approach, but very successful approach as well. Okay. Application networks. So benefit of API-led connectivity, one is it bends, but it don't break. It can adapt to your business needs, and it can be also like a future proof. Like whenever you're bringing in a new technology, you can easily, seamlessly connect it to your existing application network. Okay. Then we looked at like what do you mean by API implementation? API implementation itself is the code. Like in case like that could be our jar that has been deployed into a Mule runtime. An API client, it could be anything like a Postman is an API client. Okay. Or it could be another API that you have built. That could be an API client. API consumer is somebody who builds this client and end of the day enjoys the service. API consumer is the one who enjoys the service end of the day. API invocation is the interaction between the API client and the API implementation. Okay. API specification is a clearly defined contract for an API. Okay. And it should be always aligned. So you define the contract either using RAML or OpenAPI specification or WSDL. There are other specifications, but in Endpoint Platform, these are the ones that are supported. Okay. So clearly defining API. An API should be exposing a business service. Should be exposing a business service. Okay. And which could be derived from an application service. Okay. Which is actually exposed using an implementation that is pure code, which has clearly defined technology standards, and the client can interact with this interface that you have created, technology interface, like for instance, JSON technology interface. Okay. API-led connectivity is a style of integration where you prioritize APIs over other interfaces. You try to avoid a point-to-point integration or using a queue-based integration in the first place, but later on we will see we can also align other systems as well. Okay. Application network is a state of enterprise architecture which emerges automatically out of API-led connectivity. Because of this three-layer architecture, you can enforce governance across all the APIs. So you want to have like access to some of the system of records, you want to control access to the systems, you can do that, enforce easily using policies applied at different layers of your architecture. Okay. So you can enforce governance, discoverability. Endpoint Platform has Exchange, which acts as our discovery point or catalog. In sense, service-oriented architecture requires a service discovery site or something that could be where like anybody can go and discover like what are the APIs available or what are the business services exposed by APIs available. This discoverability we are getting from our Exchange, Endpoint Exchange. Okay. Consumability, APIs are naturally consumable, reusable. It's like just a simple technology interface which is built on top of a standard, so automatically you can consume it, reuse it. It's automatic. That's the benefit you get out of API, out of the box. And reusability. Now, reusability exists at every layer in the Endpoint Platform, right from the data type that you're defining all the way up to the APIs that you are publishing, okay, to all the way to the APIs that you are deploying. So reusability exists at every layer in Endpoint Platform, including at the code level. Okay. The more the reusability, the faster your projects. Okay, quicker to build, quicker to deploy, and so on. Okay. So that's the core takeaway from the module 1 and with respect to API-led connectivity. Okay. Now, what is the MuleSoft goal? MuleSoft goal is to connect the world's application data, devices, and transform business. This transform business, we are achieving it using API-led connectivity and a proven methodology called Catalyst. Okay. MuleSoft proposes a new IT operating model, details of which we are going to look in the next couple of slides. Then we will look into Endpoint Platform, its components, how it is composed, and brief look at the automation capabilities available in the Endpoint Platform. So the new model that MuleSoft proposes is, rather than core IT being the center for all kind of integration, let it transform itself as an enabler. When you mean that like a core IT transform as an enabler, that means that instead of doing every integration, especially integration for the organization. Let the core IT expose the data, like unlock the silos, unlock the backend systems with APIs, and let the remainder of the organization build on top of it. So this naturally automatically comes into a production consumption model where the core IT acts as the central enabler, unlocking the systems, exposing the systems via APIs. At the same time, governance also is there. Okay, so you are applying policies, strictly controlling access to data that you can easily do with APIs. System APIs are designed, normally you design system APIs and keeping those things in mind. And then with the help of C4E teams, Center for Enablement team, and a Catalyst practice in place, these unlocked systems can be consumed, aligned with business, that is using process layer APIs or experience layer APIs, and go into a production consumption feedback loop. During this process, while you're creating these all reusable assets all the way around, there is a possibility of also generating revenue, a market for self-serve that can be also generated, which automatically adds value from your application network. Okay. We have a spec-driven development model where we start with a specification, then once the specification is finalized, we go for implementation, and this is a loop. This is a iteration, like a SDLC lifecycle in Mule. You get feedbacks and usage metrics, and based on that, you can constantly improve the systems that you have already put in place. It's very simple model, but very effective model. Okay. Endpoint platform is designed to deliver API-led connectivity for organizations, and that too in a seamless, smooth fashion where you have visibility, where you have control, where you have monitoring, everything that enterprise architecture requires. Okay. So how Endpoint Platform delivers these things? So Endpoint Platform has a lot of moving parts under the hood, but they all fits nicely under one glass ceiling. That is the Endpoint Platform itself. Okay. It comes with Endpoint Security Design Center for your quick designs, like your flow designer, your API designer coming from the design center. Endpoint Management Center that comprises of your API manager services, runtime manager services, access management, so on. Endpoint Exchange, which acts as the service discovery or the central place where you discover any assets or artifacts related to your organization. You have like MuleSoft provided stuff plus your own organization's created stuff. And the deployment services, there's your runtime engine where your actual Mule applications run in a core component. To see like all these in a simplistic way, the best place to look for this is status.mulesoft.com. So this site gives you all the underlying moving parts in the Endpoint platform. Okay. You have Endpoint Management Center, which contains access management. This is for your identity management and client management. API Manager for your API management. Runtime Manager for deploying your Mule applications into different runtime planes. For instance, Cloud Hub, Cloud Hub VPC, Runtime Fabric, on-premise, that is hybrid, standalone server groups or clusters. API Analytics to get the metrics out of your API, for instance, request, response, payload size, etc. Endpoint Monitoring, the next generation monitoring capability of the Endpoint platform. API Functional Monitoring for your health checks of your APIs, internal, external. Endpoint Security, bear this in mind that there is a security edge service which is only for Runtime Fabric appliance version. You have a secrets manager which can be used to store certificates, which you normally use in your API proxy or in the DLB or when you are configuring Runtime Fabric. Those are the three places where you're using secrets manager to apply your certificates. Tokenization, detokenization service, this is available for only Runtime Fabric appliance version. Okay. Communities and engagement, Exchange is the core of everything in this case. Under the hood, it is a Maven repo. And if you want to build a community around API, there is an API Community Manager product that can be used on top of your API portal to manage large number of consumers, API consumers. Okay, when you are exposing APIs to public, there will be a lot of developers who will be using, for example, like a Google Map API, for example, a simple example. Then you have the Design Center service, which allows you to quickly build integrations, API specifications, mockings, etc. out of the box. Okay. Then you have the Runtime Manager service, Runtime Services, which is more running on the runtime plane itself. Okay, so Runtime Fabric service, this is to interact with any Runtime Fabric Kubernetes clusters that you're deploying around. Endpoint MQ, the native queuing service. Object Store V2, the native persistent state preservation, persistent store, object store, especially for storing your use watermarks, etc. Scheduler service for your polling jobs as well as your scheduled jobs. Log aggregator for uh, log visibility. Then insights for event tracking, mostly like used in Mule 3, but not much in Mule 4. A persistent queuing system that is back using SQS that you use as a VM queue in Cloud Hub, and a legacy object store V1 service, which is not available for new customers, only available for some old customers. Okay. And your visualizer, Endpoint visualizer, which gives you complete visibility of your application network and all the interactions. Data graph, that's the new GraphQL capability in the Endpoint platform. Okay. And some of the reminder services. Okay. So these are like all the fundamental building blocks of your Endpoint platform. And together they all fall under a common class ceiling. All of these under the hood are APIs, and you can directly access these via APIs. And these APIs are called our platform APIs, Endpoint platform APIs. Okay. All right. Now, yep. So what is outcome-based delivery model or a catalyst approach in Mule? So when MuleSoft decided to go with a lot of customers, some customers was really successful using the Endpoint platform, whereas some integrations were failing. Okay. It's not just MuleSoft, like most of the time integrations fail. The reason being its lack of business alignment. To work around with this, MuleSoft came up with an outcome-based delivery model, which was after studying all the customers who were really successful with the Anypoint platform, this model was put in. It is also an IP, which is available intellectual property, that is MuleSoft property, which is available free of cost for the customers as well as partners. You can get this from catalyst.mulesoft.com, which is kind of a knowledge hub for everything you need. Catalyst.mulesoft.com. I'll take a incognito. I need a partner account to see this. This, there you go. So Catalyst is a knowledge hub which gives you all the steps. Now, how Catalyst methodology is executed? So it's executed using playbooks. You have 6 playbooks to start with. Okay. Most of the time, the integration fails because of lack of business outcome. So in a Catalyst approach, you have 3 foundational pillars. One is business outcome. Your integration or project should align with business outcomes, like I'm going to buy this many, I'm going to invest like this much amount in my integration. This is the outcome that I'm expecting out of this project. Okay. Maybe like that would be increasing the revenue or reducing the cost, but that is end of the day it has some value. Okay. Technology delivery is taken care of using Anypoint platform capability. and individual integrations is delivered using the project's capability. Okay. But in order to make all these work, the organization should be enabled. The foundation for that is in the Center for Enablement. Okay, C4E team, capability for internal support and self-service, and of course, any product needs training. Okay, so these are the foundational playbooks. Okay, so first task is like getting the business aligned with the integration. So you agree on the business outcomes and you set up KPIs and benchmarks. Okay, then you go follow different steps. Okay, and towards the end, all the way along, you can always measure the impact. You can always get the KPIs out of the Endpoint platform and see where it is heading. Okay. Then we have the Endpoint platform. This is more or less like the onboarding and long-term strategy of the Endpoint platform, normally defined by a platform architect. Okay. How many, like how you are going to start the project? Would you be going with a big bang approach, or would you going with a low-hanging fruit approach? A big bang approach, you're building a lot of system APIs, moving a lot of integrations into Anypoint platform, or you take a little bit careful, controlled rollouts, like using a low-hanging fruit approach, one integration at a time or few systems at a time overall. But overall, you define the strategy here for the organization. Then some of the foundation, like establishing the foundation. For instance, setting up a CI/CD pipeline is a foundational requirement. Okay. Then the way, like most of the time Anypoint platform works, once you establish the foundations and initial integrations happen, then you automatically start to scale these things up. Okay. So fundamentals, foundations, then you start to scale, and once you are scaled, then you stabilize it later on. Okay. Then like it's more or less maintenance phase that comes in. Okay. All the way along, you can see how fast you are going in the Endpoint platform. You can always measure the impact using KPIs. Okay. Individual projects. From the strategy, you get the individual projects. It could be like one integration product. It could be one integration product, or it could be a couple of APIs, or it could be a simple migration to start with. But each has its own way to deliver it, right? So solution architecture and everything, but this is more on the solutioning front, individual solutioning front, and the MCPA is more on the platform architecture front. This one is more related to the integration solutions task. Okay. Once you have your platform and projects ready, you need to have like a C4E. But the first thing that you set up in any organization is a center for enablement to drive this strategy in the first place. It normally comprises of a cross-functional team which comes from different groups within the organization. There may be Java architects, there may be SAP architects, there may be network admin, there may be CIOs, CTOs. Depending upon the organization structure, you can bring it. For large organizations, this will be more like kind of a federated model. There will be a core C4E, and from there will be satellite C4E for different regions or for different technologies. Okay. But end of the day, this is a cross-function team. It's not just comprised of just MuleSoft team, but like everyone in the organization, leadership. Okay. The core responsibility of this organization is to set up and control and determine, narrate the vision for Anypoint platform journey or API-led connectivity journey. Okay. You also evangelize for the future. Okay. Like solve the problems of the present as well as prepare for the opportunities in the future as well. Another important task of C4E is to promote this API-led connectivity or API-led connectivity design style. Prefer like promote it within the organization to adopt it. Okay. And all the way along, you can also always measure impact. Okay. So we call this the CIO dashboards. Like the metrics, you can measure it from a CIO dashboards. You can find the source code for that here. You may have to install it. A little bit of tweaking may be required, but it's ready to go on. GitHub, Catalyst, Mule, M4. Okay. So this will give you all the dashboards required for you to see in real time what is happening in your endpoint platform. Is your strategy working? Is the project going on time? Is it getting adopted? Is the culture getting adopted across the organization? Where are the bottlenecks? You can identify all those things from the dashboards. Okay. Currently, like you can get dashboards for Elastic Log/Kibana, Elk. You can put those dashboards in Splunk, and you can put it in Tableau. Okay. Now, what are the things that this measures? It has got meanings also, right? So all the metrics as you want, you can find it here. Okay. Now, just for example, like what are the total number of users in the Endpoint platform? Endpoint platform is not a user-based subscription; it is a core-based licensing. So you can have any number of users use Endpoint platform. Your core licensing is only the limit. So if you're just inviting the users, you can get up to 10,000 users onboarded. If you're using an identity provider, you can have more than that. Okay, so it's not user-based subscription; it's a core-based subscription. Number of active users. Are people more getting involved into the endpoint platform journey, going into a payload connectivity way? Okay. Like which part of your LOBs are not using efficiently or like not effectively using endpoint platform? Okay. Is there's like is it busy or it's like things has gone stagnant? You can identify that from the user activities. Okay. And are you growing in the endpoint platform journey with number of assets that are in design center? How much are stuck in the design center? You can find it from the total number of assets in exchange. So that would be different. You can calculate that. Okay. How much components are getting reused? Reusability is the core for speed in case of endpoint platform. You can get those matrices. So essentially, you get all the matrices that you need to monitor your endpoint platform journey, your Catalyst journey, your C4E journey, your APLet connectivity journey. You can always monitor it from just one dashboard. Okay. So it's the foundation for outcome-based delivery model. Okay, it's a Catalyst approach, and it is available for all the partners and the customers free of cost. Okay. So what are the common KPIs? So please refer to that GitHub repos. It contains like almost all the metrics, but what we try to in the certification front, it would be more on inferring from those metrics. What does it mean that if such and such metrics are coming in such and such a way, what would you infer out of it? Is the platform growing in the right direction? Is the project going in the right phase? That's the inference that you make from that metrics. Okay. Now, one thing that Anypoint platform provides is flexibility. Flexibility in a sense like choice of deployment options you get. And essentially, this also has a huge impact. Selecting the right deployment option also has a huge impact on how you're going to drive your organization's integration strategy. Okay. So to understand all these different deployment options, let's go to some of the basics on this one. Integration developers writing system layer in Mule comes in C4E or outside of C4E. Now, the system of records or like the core systems are owned by the respective team. For instance, like you have a Salesforce system, there will be a Salesforce architect or Salesforce admin who will be responsible for that system. Okay. Now the question is that can they write a system API on their own, or do you want to provide a Mule developer and help the Salesforce architect to build a system API? He knows like what are the data he needs to expose, and the Mule developer can do that for him. But the C4E is crucial for orchestrating that gap. Now, if the Salesforce team comes with that, hey, like we don't have MuleSoft capability at the moment with us, so can we like borrow like two developers from your end, and can we do that? So that can be orchestrated from a C4E team. C4E is more on managing these kind of scenarios, bringing in those collaborations within the organization. Okay. Hope that answers your question. Cool. So next one. So where do you go? Right. Yep. So different deployment options. Okay. So that is a basic concept. There is a control plane concept in Endpoint Platform, and there is a runtime plane. Okay. In the control plane, all these services that you see, status.mulesoft.com, access management, this up to the services, these services, design center, okay, up to this part. Okay, these all reside in the control plane. Okay, this all resides in the control plane. So your API manager, for example, this would be like, we'll just put a note some API manager, runtime manager, etc. So these all resides in the control plane. Your exchange also, it's important. Design center, these all exist in the control plane. And you get like, you can deploy, you can use the MuleSoft hosted control plane, or you can go with the customer hosted control plane. Two options are available. Now, let's take the first example when you have MuleSoft managing your control plane, and your runtime plane is called Cloud Hub anyway. Cloud Hub, that's where your applications are getting deployed. Under the hood, these are all AWS infrastructure. So control plane, runtime plane. So your first option is going with a Cloud Hub. Yes, runtime manager is also in the control plane. Okay. Now in the control plane, right? So if it is MuleSoft hosted, that's called Cloud Hub. And there is a secure way of putting APIs because Cloud Hub is public. So you want to make sure that your APIs are secure and accessible only from your organization or controlling access. You configure a VPC, virtual private cloud, which is essentially a subnet within Cloud Hub. Okay. So using this control plane, you can deploy your applications into a runtime plane, that is Cloud Hub or Cloud Hub VPC. And that's the easiest way to go step into Endpoint Platform. Okay. Now, for some customers, the challenges is that they have all their existing infrastructure or lying in, like, so for example, like Azure, or they have like sufficient maturity in Docker and Kubernetes services. For those customers, the customers decides that, hey, we can do this job better than MuleSoft, so we are going to deploy this ourselves. That is in their own infrastructure, and that becomes a customer hosted infrastructure deployment option. This is customer hosted. And if it is going cloud way, Azure, AWS, etc., okay, you get two options, two flavors. One is Runtime Fabric VM type appliance. That is, you are deploying your Mule applications into VM, Kubernetes cluster. K8 Kubernetes, short form Kubernetes K8, Kubernetes in VM. Okay, and you can also opt for the latest offering, that is self-managed Kubernetes. Runtime Fabric, RTF, self-managed Kubernetes. This is available at the moment for Azure Kubernetes service, then Elastic Kubernetes service, Elastic EKS, and Google Kubernetes Engine GKE. Okay. This portfolio will expand over the period of time. Okay. If you want to deploy into OpenShift, you need to configure your VMs. You have to go for an appliance version at the moment. OpenShift is there in the roadmap in the self-managed fashion. But at the moment, if you want to deploy Runtime Fabric into OpenShift, you may need to configure virtual machines yourself and create a Kubernetes cluster on your own. Then you can deploy Runtime Fabric there. It's not out of the box supported, but we can do it. Okay. So two things, right? Now, sometimes the volume of data is sufficiently large, or customer has requirements of on-premise data processing, or the data is like really complex that you need custom machines, custom integrations to break it down, custom Mule runtimes to break it down. So those scenarios, customers decide to go and deploy applications into their own premise data centers. So that will be say data center. And this model deployment model is called hybrid. Again, it is customer hosted. Customer is taking care of the infrastructure in that case. And you get like 3 deployment options there. So one, you can go with a standalone server. You can group a couple of servers together for administrative easiness and also for a bare minimum high availability server group. Or you can do a reliable processing configuration, that is using a cluster. Okay. In cluster, these are all connected, bridged together using Hazelcast. Okay, so now all these nodes are connected. These are like not connected. These are still like individual silos only. Okay. Server groups, whereas a cluster is bounded together using Hazelcast. Okay. So 3 different deployment options from the control plane itself. Like using the same control plane, you can deploy into cloud. Using the same control plane, you can deploy into Runtime Fabric. With the same control plane, you can deploy also in your on-premise. So that's the huge flexibility a customer gets with respect to where their integrations are. For large organizations, this offers like sufficient level of flexibility, regardless where the data sources are. Okay. Now, for some instances, customer not common data. Cluster is slightly different. I will explain it a little bit more. Okay. In some cases, like the customers prefer to take this, manage everything on their own because they need like some form of data residency. Okay. So here the scenario is that when the APIs are running here, there are matrices that are being sent to the control plane. Now the control plane is managed by MuleSoft, so some customer doesn't want that. Also needs to be that also should not happen. Like API invocation metrics, from where the origin of traffic is coming, all those informations logs are getting forwarded. So this some customers prefer not to have those kind of things. So for those customers, we give a miniatured version of Cloud Hub. Sorry, not Cloud Hub. The Anypoint control plane, which can be hosted in the customer hosted environment, which is called Private Cloud Edition, PCE. Okay, Private Cloud Edition, which essentially is a Kubernetes package. You get a Kubernetes package with all the API manager as Docker containers, runtime manager as Docker containers. You install it into a 4-node cluster or a 4-node Kubernetes cluster or 7-node Kubernetes cluster, and you run your integrations using a hybrid environment. Okay. So in that case, this is like for strict data residency requirements, like customer doesn't want any kind of metadata even leaving the premise. So in that case, go for a private cloud edition. Otherwise, this could be into a data center, this could be into the cloud also, doesn't matter. And the other alternative is using the control plane. Okay. This is a MuleSoft hosted control plane. MuleSoft hosted control plane and MuleSoft hosted runtime plane. runtime plane. So this means that customer don't have the overhead of managing the infrastructure. In other cases, customer do have an extra effort that needs to be taken when they are handling the infrastructure part. Okay. Now, what do you mean by this cluster, right? So there was a question there. So what is cluster? Okay. Cluster is a group of services, group of servers, Mule runtimes that are put together, configured together as a cluster. Okay. Now, when you form a cluster, one node forms as your primary node. Okay. One node acts as your primary node. So this will become your primary node. This is automatically elected. Okay. What Hazelcast does here is that it brings you two things into a cluster. One is fault tolerance. So suppose like while your cluster, while this node was processing some data, and there is a design pattern, you have to use the pub sub pattern here. Suppose like one node was failing, the corresponding work could be transported into another node. So automatic fault tolerance, you get it from the cluster. It's one feature. Second thing like Hazelcast does here is replication. So you have object stores, VMQs. So Hazelcast makes sure that these object stores and VMQs are in sync across all the nodes. Okay. So make sure that all these are in sync across the node. Okay. Okay. So our object stores are in sync in this mode. Okay. And similarly, similar thing goes for your VMQs. Okay. VMQ. Okay. And the Hazelcast makes sure that the VMQs are also in sync across this cluster. Okay. This also provides you one more feature, that is this is your persistence, reliability as well. So as long as one node is there, you have your VMQs and object store. This is completely in memory. Hazelcast is completely in memory. You can extend it with JDBC for more reliability, but as long as one node is standing, as I call it like last man standing, you have your data there. Okay. So data one, a cluster can use a pub sub pattern. So one node can publish, another node can subscribe, and that's how works gets distributed in a cluster. Workload gets distributed in a cluster using VMQs. VMQs are the workhorse for that. State preservation is done by node replication. Okay, each node object stores are replicated across each nodes. VMQs are replicated across each nodes. So that's how it gets its reliability part, plus inherent fault tolerant mechanism. As long like one node failure, automatically transfer the workload to the next available node. Okay. I have a question here. So that is one of my project client uses own AWS cloud and there is no API manager option in the Endpoint platform. What does this model relates to? Is this PCE? So if you look at the endpoint pricing, API manager is a la carte product. Okay. So the core subscription plus its API manager. So if in that case, like the customer may not have purchased API manager. Okay, so that could be the reason you may not be seeing an API manager there. It could be the same, either it could be a gold subscription or a platinum or titanium subscription, but without API manager analytics. Okay, right. So, yep. Right. Okay, so those are the different deployment options. So cloud up, that is MuleSoft managed iPaaS. Under the hood is AWS infrastructure. Okay. Then you have Runtime Fabric, MuleSoft hosted control plane. In Runtime Fabric, the control plane is managed by MuleSoft, but the customer manages the runtime, like the Kubernetes and everything will be managed by customer. And you get two flavors. One is a VM flavor, that is your appliance flavor, which is a packaged Kubernetes. You won't be able to customize the Kubernetes. You have limitations there with the operating system you can use. It should be like Red Hat Enterprise Linux or CentOS. You don't get the luxury of using other Linux operating systems. Whereas if a customer goes for a self-managed Kubernetes version, then you also have like the flexibility to choose your own flavor of Linux operating system to run your Kubernetes cluster. Okay. Then you have a hybrid deployment option, which is the control plane still goes into the MuleSoft, but the runtime plane is now managed by customer. Normally, this is a requirement when you go for on-prem data, too much data in the on-premise, and doesn't make any sense to make journey from your on-premise or your data center to all the way to cloud and back. Okay. Then there is private cloud edition, which allows you complete data residency, where your integration, no API metrics, invocations leaves your premise. And there is one more solution called PCF, Pivotal Cloud Foundry Edition, which is not much used nowadays, but it was a precursor for what you see today. Essentially allows you to deploy applications into Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Okay. That also comes as a control plane, again as a control plane, and it also has a runtime plane. The runtime plane is just like PCF control plane, PCF Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and the runtime plane is cloud. So that cloud is Pivotal Cloud Foundry. And you spin up droplets there. Pivotal virtual machines are called droplets, and you can deploy your Mule runtime, Mule applications into Pivotal Cloud Foundry Cloud. Okay, this also gives you cloud up-like functionality or runtime fabric-like functionality, but totally managed at the customer end. But it's like not much of use. Very few customers are using, but still it is there. Product is there. Okay. Right. So we looked at different deployment options. Yeah. So describe the purpose and roles of Center for Enablement, KPIs to measure success, with specific organizational preference, constraints, identify all endpoint deployment options. Okay. And then we have the entity management and client management. So in the endpoint platform, we have a clear distinction of internal users versus external users. Okay. And both are managed by using client providers. Okay. Before going there, let me ask you one question. How many different control planes are available in Endpoint Platform? How many different control planes are available in Endpoint Platform? 3. Yes, there are 3 control planes. So one control plane is anypoint.mulesoft.com itself. This is the US hosted control plane. Okay. Anypoint.mulesoft.com, this is US hosted control plane. This resides in US East. Then you have EU1 .anypoint.mulesoft.com. This control plane is strictly for EU GDPR constraints. Okay, so this is hosted in Frankfurt, Germany, and using this you can deploy into 2 regions, only 2 regions. You can deploy your Mule applications or APIs into Frankfurt or into Ireland. Okay, so this is strictly for that GDPR constraint. Okay. Then we have one more. That is agao.mulesoft.com. agao.anypoint.mulesoft.com. This one is this runs on FedRAMP compliant infrastructure, and this is again hosted in US, but this is in a different data center, US West data center. Architecturally, this is slightly different from what you see like a regular endpoint platform. This one is FedRAMP, running on FedRAMP certified infrastructure. Mule runtimes are fixed 140 compliant. You don't get a VM queue, but you certainly have object store here. Okay. And this is only one deployment region is there, that is in the US West itself. Okay, so three different control planes are available in the Endpoint platform managed by MuleSoft. And three are for three different purposes: one for GDPR, one for government, one for worldwide use. Okay. How many different data deployment regions are there in Cloud Hub? How many different deployment regions are there in Cloud Hub? 12. Yes, there are 12 deployment regions in Cloud Hub. It's around the clock, right? So, so these are the different deployment options. Now let's look at like the identity management part of this control plane. So you want to bring in your organization users to the Endpoint platform. The easiest way to bring them is just send them an invite, email invite. It's good for like one user, two users, 10 users, 20 users. But if the user number is like really growing high, then you need to have a solution, permanent solution for that. Plus, you don't want everybody to have individual username and password. Every organization has their own identity provider. So you can use single sign-ons and all those things. For that, you need to configure an IDP, identity provider. Okay, as your AD service, for example. Okay, now with an IDP configure, the constraint here is that in the Anypoint platform, you can have only one identity provider, and that too at an org level. Okay, so you can have only one identity provider configured in Anypoint platform at a given time, and it has got another limitation, that is, we need it to be either it should be either SAML 2.0 compliant or OpenIAM compliant. Not this one. You configure that in the access management. And here, okay, there was like some Q&As. Just a minute. View Q&A. Yes. Okay. So here, okay, so that's a different question. I'm addressing that in the next domain-driven design module with the database part. No worries. So this one, yep, it comes in like the access management, and this is where you configure your identity provider. Identity provider is to bring your organization users. So this is your internal user. Okay, and it has to be either OpenID or SAML 2.0 compliant one. These are limitations we have. Okay. Then once you publish your APIs, then you have like a lot of people consuming your APIs. So you want to manage those APIs, like manage those users. And again, like those users maybe not just consuming your Anypoint platform API, or not platform APIs, like the APIs that you have published in your control plane, in your runtime plane, like your experience API, for example. There may be like Java services which these guys may be consuming. So you need a comprehensive way to manage your consumers. You configure a client provider, client identity provider. Okay. This you can have any number of client providers. There's no limit. Okay. Many client providers. Client providers. You can have multiple ones. Okay. And this is for your external users. This is for your internal users. Okay. Now, client ID provider, you can configure it again from here. So, ID provider, client provider, ID providers, client providers. Clear distinction. Okay. So, client provider. Now, again, with the client providers, you have a constraint. It supports only three protocols. It should be either OpenAM, Big Federate, or OpenIDC DCR. OpenIDC, Dynamic Client Registration. When you apply these client providers, you automatically get to enforce auth policies, auth token policies. Okay. So So the consumer first goes to the identity provider, for instance, like Okta or OAuth, validate themselves with the username password. They will get the bearer token, and they come with the token to your API, and your API policies validate those. Okay. So three things, right? So for the client provider, only three are supported: OpenAM, Ping Federate, and OpenIDC, dynamic client registration. Okay. Now there will be like scenarios where organizations has gone through mergers and acquisitions, so you may end up with multiple IT providers. Multiple IDP, IDP1, IDP2, IDP3 will be there. So a recommended approach in this case is to use something called as a federated IDP. Okay. Which can bring in the users, aggregate the users, and bring into MuleSoft. So one example of federated IDP is Ping Federate. Okay. This one is used most of the time in those kind of scenarios. Okay. Okay. So that brings us to complete coverage of IT management versus client management. Yes. How to enable service accounts which may be needed to publish assets for deployments using CI/CD. So for that, two options are available. Either you create an independent email account and make that as a, like give it only the permissions to deploy applications. That was the way how it was done in the past, but now there is a better way to do it. That is using client apps. So here in the access management, you will have client apps, connected apps. Okay. You can create a connected app, for instance, like a DevOps app, and grant it permissions just to do the DevOps part. So that will, like whenever your CLI tool or Maven is trying to reach out, it will be using these credentials, client ID, client secret. Okay. Hope that answers your question. Great. Publish assets, yeah, you can just give the permissions to publish to Exchange if that's needed. Deployment only need like runtime access, runtime manager access. Okay. Right. So that covers this part. C4E, different deployment options, client management, and client provider. Okay. Next, we are going to designing APIs and interactions. How does a C4E look like? So a C4E looks like something like this. Like an organization will be having different line of businesses. They may be having different stakeholders. You try to bring in all the stakeholders together under one umbrella. Mostly it comprises of architects and senior managers and system owners. Okay. Some of the guiding principles will be driving API-led connectivity approach. Do it with API first. Then deciding on like self-service. That is, if you're a system owner, your goal is to enable a system API through which you can allow rest of the organizations to consume your endpoints. Depending upon the organization structure, it could be federated or it could be a core one. Organized differently to drive API-led connectivity. Most of the time, the core systems will be always owned by the core IT and central IT. But instead of doing everything on their own, they will be just building system APIs and exposing the system, and at first adding all the governance required around those systems. Some of the metrics that may come in handy. For instance, if the assets of the exchange are increasing, that means that things are happening in the organization. When assets are being like interactions with the assets are increasing in Exchange, that signifies that sufficient number of users are reusing the assets in the Endpoint Platform. Okay. If the number of APIs managed in the Endpoint Platform is increasing, that means that you are going in the right direction. Okay. So these are like some of the metrics that you can consider for this, but the full list is in the GitHub repo link I shared. Depending upon the control plane and the runtime plane and who manages what, we have different deployment options. We have Cloud Hub, we have Cloud Hub VPC, both are managed by MuleSoft. We have a pivotal Cloud Foundry edition and a private cloud edition, both which are hosted and managed by customer. We have two flavors based on Kubernetes Docker, that is Endpoint Runtime Fabric, with Endpoint Runtime Fabric appliance version, which comes with the packaged Kubernetes, and then you have Endpoint Runtime Fabric, which is a self-managed Kubernetes one, which allows you to run on Azure Kubernetes Service, Elastic Kubernetes Service, etc. And then we have the hybrid or manually provisioned model, where you are deploying into standalone servers, server groups, or clusters. Okay. So like high level view, which we will go in a little bit deeper later on. Okay. After a tiny break. Before taking a break, any questions? We can take a small QA. It's all good. All right. So we'll take a tiny break now. We'll be back in 15 minutes and we'll continue from here.